This all from the country. All right, I think we'll get started now. So yeah, thank you all for joining. My name is Dan Sprock. I am the Director of People and Culture here at Fairygodboss. We are the largest career community for women. Our platform supports women in their careers through free resources like company reviews, job listings, webinars with various experts. Hi. Virtual recruiting events, and a community where users can be honest about their triumphs and failures, either as themselves or anonymously. So yeah, before we get things started, I want to let everyone know that you can ask questions throughout this webinar. Please make sure to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screens. And yeah, this webinar is also going to be recorded and sent out as a follow-up, so you can feel free to rewatch anything you may have missed. So yeah, we are here to talk about resumes. So let's get those questions started. Right now, I'm looking to see if we have any open questions. I'm sure people are typing right now, so I'll give you all a few minutes. Okay, first question. Do you think we need summary in a resume? So I think it's dependent upon what you're exactly interviewing for. I personally am not a very big fan of objective statements at the top of resumes. You know, the thing where, you know, you have objective and it says, looking to pursue a career in sales, blah, blah, blah. I really think the only time that that's really applicable is if you are one, either very, very entry level, or two, you're actually switching careers. If you're already in finance, for example, and you're looking for a position, another position in finance, really an objective statement is not, and a summary is not terribly necessary. And quite frankly, the amount of space that you have on the page for your resume, you should look at all of that as like currency, right? You have only so much of it and you want to use all of it as efficiently as you can. And really a summary can come through in both a cover letter and, if you're lucky enough, during a screening process or an interview. So I would say, generally speaking, summaries usually aren't necessary. And the next question is actually about cover letters. So the thing about cover letters is, obviously when we're looking for new positions, we can, you know, do this sort of like mass apply across many, many different jobs. And, you know, we don't want to go through the process of having to write one specific cover letter for every single job, because quite frankly, it's really time consuming. So I think the safest bet is that you work with one as yourself, that you create one for yourself as a template, right? But then work with that template and try and tailor it to the positions that you're most excited about, and the ones that are going to, that really you can tell, like you can really advertise like certain specifics of yourself that really speak to the role. But yeah, of course, writing one from scratch every single time is not ideal. We don't have that kind of time, but you definitely want to create a very effective template for yourself. Just highlighting who you are, you know, what your background is, what your expertise are, and why you're excited for this role specifically. And I think that's where the customization can come in place with cover letters. Let's see here. Do you review, give feedback on individual resumes? I do if candidates ask. Oftentimes, candidates will ask me either during an interview process or during a screening process, is there something on my resume that you're confused about? Could you give me some feedback on how my resume is formatted? In those situations, I do give my honest feedback. I have a lot of thoughts on what makes a resume most effective, which I'm sure will come out during this webinar. But yeah, it's generally only something that I actually give feedback on if I'm asked for it, because quite frankly, the questions that I have to ask during the screening process are going to pertain much, much more to, you know, why they're specifically fit for this role. Are they a cultural fit? What's their background? I really want to tap into that. So the only time it would ever come from me is if I just straight up need clarification on something on the resume itself that isn't quite maybe formatted the right way. So I do give feedback, but really only if I'm prompted to. You got great questions so far. We got so many more. Okay, let's see how many we can get through. Mary asks, curious on your thoughts on how long a resume should be. depending on what point you are in your career. I've been working for 10 plus years. Someone recently told me I should be on 2 pages now. Mary, that's a very good question. I know feel like I'm going to say this after a lot of questions that it depends. If I would say that when ideal, it's more ideal to really condense it to 1 page whenever you can. That being said, you also don't want to work with like a size 8 font either. Believe me, people who have to look at resumes all day do not want to have to do that. I've been there many times before. I would say no more than 2 pages, but when possible, try and condense it to 1. If you've been in the same career same industry for pretty much like a really long time in your 10 plus years, I would say that maybe the entry level positions you don't need to put bullet points for, thus saving you a little bit of space on the page. If you're 10 plus years, I mean, you're pretty senior at that point. The company that you're applying for is undoubtedly going to be more interested in your senior level qualities. In your past maybe 2 or 3 roles, but maybe those first couple of entry level positions, you can basically do the whole, your title and the duration of time you were there, but don't feel compelled to put, as many bullet points for those that you would in, say, your most recent roles. So 2 is fine, but I would say try and condense it to 1 whenever possible. Really good question, though. Anonymous asks, should I include dates on my resume? I don't want them to know my age, but I don't want them to make it seem like I'm trying to hide it either. Very real question here. Dates, I mean, I think that, generally speaking, dates are good to list. You don't necessarily have to put, if you've been at a company for a long period of time, you don't necessarily have to say, you don't have to put the month before the year. But generally speaking, a resume, people are going to expect to see, the duration of time that you were spent at that company. So it has less to do. It should really have less to do with, fear of aging yourself versus your employer should have a good idea of how long you've been at places. That being said, I totally understand that fear. Some employers that are, quite frankly, working in another century. Are like totally can be ageist. There's many examples of that, and it's terribly unfortunate. But any employer that you really ultimately want to work for will not do that. So I would say that include them because your employers do want to see how much time you've been at companies. 1 page or more, we kind of answered that one. How do you effectively write a resume when the job description is 5 to 7 generic lines? You be truthful about yourself and about your background, and you really tap into what those 5 to 7 generic lines are, which I know can be very, very difficult. But for you as an applicant, it should probably also tell you a little bit about the company if their JD, if their job description is only 5 to 7 lines. If it's like super like simple and doesn't really specify responsibilities of the role, I would suggest trying to find out what you can about the company online, see if they have a site, see if they have a career page, an About Us page, hop on Glassdoor, hop on Indeed, look at those reviews. It might give you a little bit of insight into not just what kind of company it is and if you ultimately want to work there, but maybe through those avenues, you can get a better understanding of how to tackle your resume a little bit better in tailoring it for that position specifically. But generally speaking, for me, I don't like it when I see only 5 to 7 lines of a JD. It should generally be much more specific than that. Even if it's entry level, it should not just be that. Will I be providing some examples or templates? I'm actually not going to be sharing templates. I am happy though to share plenty of examples and strategies throughout the webinar. So no, unfortunately, I do not have templates. We have another 1-page question. It's very, very popular. Should a resume be strictly a 1-pager? Well, this is a good question. What font size do you recommend, and stick with Times Font? Generally speaking, I would say try to avoid too many different fonts in one resume. I would say stick to 2, maybe. Definitely no more than 3. And, like I said earlier in this webinar, that, the space on the page is very, very precious, right? It should be like no wasted real estate. You want only the stuff that's going to effectively get you a position to be on that page. So for me, I don't like seeing fonts generally like smaller than 10 and, bigger than say like 12, 13. So it should really kind of be in that wheelhouse of like 10, 11, 12 for your fonts on your resumes. I usually like seeing something like 10 or 11. Let's see what else. We have a very specific question here that I like. I have 10 plus years as a programmer, marketing myself as a technical business analyst. If I'm applying to a business analyst position, should I include these technical skills anyway? Job post does not list these hard skills. I would absolutely include the skills. In fact, in your skills and interests section on your resume, I'm actually a big fan of leading off with that at the very top of a resume. A lot of people usually oftentimes have it at the end and their experience comes first. But if you are able to sort of condense those hard and soft skills of yours into like a nice centered, like maybe like 3 lines or so that are like really, really specific, I think that's great. Avoid generalities when you are talking about skills. I mean, with this question, you're talking more about technical skills, so I'm sure that you'll be able to provide specific examples. But when we list skills, I don't mean saying effective communicator, right? That doesn't really tell me too much about, your actual communication skills. In your experience section, you should actually be providing a bullet that shows me that you are an effective communicator. So when you list those skills, make sure that they're very, very specific and not really vague and up for interpretation. So yeah, technical skills, I would definitely list them even if the job description is not calling for it. They know what you're about then. Very good question here. How do you get your resume looked at in places like Indeed, et cetera, when so many people apply? Certain positions are going to inherently invite more traffic. So it obviously is very much dependent upon job title with what you're sort of stacked up against, so to speak. But most employers use some kind of ATS software, which is applicant tracking software. And most of them have algorithms built into them to detect certain keywords. Sometimes it's actually set up to detect spelling errors. So I know that this is a little bit of a generic answer from me, but really the way you get it looked at in places like Indeed is to make that resume as much of a rock star resume as you possibly can. I would say that if you're really, really ambitious about a specific job that you apply for on a place like Indeed, especially if it's a position that you think is getting a lot of traffic, sometimes on Indeed sometimes they put the word like hot next to it, because it demonstrates that a lot of people have been applying. I would definitely hit up that company on LinkedIn, look at who their talent acquisition person is, look for who their HR person is, message them, say that, hey, I just applied on Indeed, thought I'd drop my resume here as well. And that's always a good thing. It shows a company that you're taking initiative, that you're ambitious, and that you're doing more than just simply hitting the apply button and being done with it. So it can be hard to get your resume seen every single time for every position on Indeed. But I think that you have really a two-step approach here. One, just making that resume as much of an all-star resume as you can. And then 2, try to find out as much of this company outside of Indeed as you can and try and get in touch with someone in the TA or the HR department. What are your top 3 tips for resume formatting? Okay, so we talked about this a little bit already with regards to length and with regard to font. Definitely keeping it concise. 1 page, font size 10 or 11. So I won't use those as examples because we already went through them. For me, I think that a lot of people get wrapped up in trying to make their resume looking a little bit too dazzly and sparkly with all sorts of different sections, color-coded. Honestly, it can be that, but what I really need to understand as somebody who looks at resumes all day long, what I need to understand is what skills you have, what level of experience you have, and why you would be a good fit for this role specifically. So I would say keeping it concise to the job role specifically that you're applying to, linking it to your experience is definitely key. I would say don't be too chummy, meaning oftentimes in the skills and interests section, some people like to put things like, after they're serious with their skills and interests, sometimes they'll throw in, oh, I'm a Star Wars nerd, which I am, but I'm not putting that on my resume. It's something chummy like that and friendly like that should probably come out organically during the interview process if you ever get there. If you get friendly enough with the person who's interviewing you. But I would say avoid being a little bit too friendly on your resume. And let's see, my third one I would say is do not lie. Oftentimes people feel compelled to stretch out the amount of time that they've been with an employer, to make it look like they're a more loyal employee, to make it look like they are more likely to stick around with their next employer. Do not do this. Employers do background checks. They oftentimes will, especially if you use a reference from a previous company that you've worked at, oftentimes employers will confirm the dates that you've been there. So stick to the truth. Do not try and stretch the truth any way, shape, or form. Let's see. What is the biggest mistake people make on their resumes? I'll tell you, I've been in this for a little bit over 7 years. I don't know how many resumes I've seen in my lifetime. It must be more than 1,000, maybe less than 10,000. But I've seen all sorts of mistakes on resumes. But the worst thing that I think you can do on a resume is just through any means just straight up misrepresenting yourself, because it's not just a waste of the employer's time, of all the people at your prospective employer who need to actually sit in an interview, but ultimately it's a complete waste of your time. There really is no such thing as faking it with another company just because it's a role that you want. It really doesn't exist. So any time that you completely misrepresent yourself from what's on paper to what is in person, that's just about the worst thing that I can see during the interview process. And it's something that does happen, but it is what you are on paper should more or less translate to some version of yourself in person. There should not be a big disconnect between the two. So making sure that there's no disconnect on your resume, I would say that that's oftentimes a mistake that people make, is not representing themselves correctly. Great questions, everybody. Let me see what else. Appreciated. Okay, so this one, any recommendations on getting through the initial automated keyboard scraping most applicant tracking systems would be greatly appreciated? Yes. So you're correct. And as I said a little bit earlier, a lot of ATS softwares are specifically designed to weed out certain resumes. You know, if you don't have X years of experience, if you don't have experience in X, Y, and Z fields and industries, more or less they're designed to sort of like, I think you used the word scrape, kind of scrape those out and like filter out other ones. So there's definitely a built-in filtration process. So I'm going to say the same thing that I said a little bit earlier before, and that is that if you really want to get past that first phase, doing your due diligence on LinkedIn. LinkedIn should be at the top of your mind for any role that you're very, very passionate about. Profiling that company, understanding what they're about, and finding out as best as you can who works there in terms of talent acquisition and HR. Reaching out to them directly is basically this very, very practical you're bypassing the very first step, which is just applying on Indeed or something like that. Trust me, they are going to read your message. Talent acquisition people, as much as people want to secure a job, talent acquisition people are specifically motivated by finding people for the job. So if you feel like your resume is just kind of getting lost in the shuffle, go to Indeed. because recruiters are really, really obligated to kind of scrape through all of their messages, and the ones that do send messages just have a higher likelihood of getting to that next phase. So yes, reach out on Indeed. Are listing GPAs in a resume necessary? I don't really think so. It could be slightly dependent upon the role itself. If you're going into academia, perhaps it's necessary. But generally speaking, unless it's something that you legitimately want to flaunt because you got a great GPA, you graduated valedictorian, whatever it might be, that I would say it's fine. But a GPA is really not something that I would list as a necessity in most resumes. I think it was in the idea of what resumes were in the past, but I think employers, we've kind of moved beyond like having that as a requirement. So not really would be my response. Let's see what else. Okay, really good question. I am trying to exit a career hiatus. I have addressed the gap in my career summary, along with skills and training obtained during hiatus. Should I also address the gap in my cover letter? And should I lead with the gap when talking to a corporate recruiter or third-party recruiters? This is an awesome question. And first of all, I think that you've already done a really, really good job in the fact that you want to address it, right? Because when you're making a career change, recruiters, companies, they want to know why. And they want, not only do they want to know why, they want to know what kind of transferable skills you have from that previous career to this new career. So I think that you've taken the right step in doing it in your career summary, and I would definitely put it in your cover letter. In fact, I probably would lead off with it, or at least have it in probably your first paragraph. But yeah, you definitely want to let recruiters know. It's actually something that people get very, very worried about when they're making a career change. But I think when it's framed correctly, it can actually work as a big advantage for you. If you're able to articulate why you want to make this career change and how you think your prior careers have given you enough relevant experience to excel in this new career change, it's something that stands out. And quite frankly, during the recruitment process, like that's really the first step, is literally just getting you to stand out. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. And I totally agree with your process of including it. So yeah, great job. How important are the additional sections on a resume? Skills, volunteer experience outside of work activities, etc. Do employers place a lot of importance on these sections? Every employer is different, so there is no universal answer to this question. I would say that most of the time I would try to include something, but don't put something for the sake of putting something. In other words, do not include a skills section on your resume because you've got a little bit of space left and the skill is like, I'm familiar with Microsoft Office. Like, don't do that. At this point, employers are going to assume, one, that you probably know what Microsoft Office is, and two, this is like a section for you to be interesting. And quite frankly, Microsoft Office, to me, is not like the most interesting thing. But no, I think it is necessary because it does show you as a person a bit. It does, and more than just bullets on a page. Most of it should be somehow relatable to the role itself or the mission of the company. And then maybe like one or two can be like just, like personal triumphs. I know on my resume, like I have, it's like I think it's my last bullet point in my like skills and activities and volunteer section is that I was a avid runner for a running group that does charity work. Like that's like literally was like my last thing. So yeah, I think it's important. Not as important as your experience and not as important as, representing yourself well. But yeah, I would say try to include it, especially if you can get all of it on one page. That's great. How do you feel about your skills being bulleted? I feel awesome about it because recruiters like seeing bullet points. We like seeing A, B, C, D. Great. I understand what you did at this company. I understand what your skills are. It's all laid out for me in a super organized way that makes it easy for me to read. So yes, I very much appreciate it. We as talent acquisition people, we look at so many resumes. So making it simple for us to internalize, kind of like quickly and concisely, that is always appreciated. So bullets will never be, I will never shake my head at providing bullets. So yeah, good question. How do you address a 4-year career gap? By being honest. You don't want to misrepresent yourself. It's the biggest mistake you can make when you have a career gap. I think that during the gap itself, you should probably, internally first come up with some, basically a list of things that make your experience during those 4 years applicable for why you're joining the job market again now, how it can be transferable, how it can relate to a new position that you're taking, and try as much as you can to use it to your advantage. Oftentimes, just like the whole concept of like, a career change is a really scary thing, and like employers don't like to see it. I think that's changing a little bit. I don't think it's across the board a thing, but I think it is changing a little bit. And the same thing with career gaps. Employers oftentimes look at people that have been out of, work for some time as hungry and ambitious. And if they're able to represent themselves well, you can really make that gap, a real advantage for yourself. So long as you can really highlight how it has impacted you and how it relates to the role that you're applying for. I think that kind of inference making and that type of ability to connect the career gap to this position would be great to do, not just on the resume itself, but during the interview process. Any keywords you like to see on a resume that makes you say, hey, they get this whole resume thing? I don't know if there's like exact keywords that make me think that, but there are definitely a lot of like repeat terms that do make me roll my eyes a little bit. I think earlier I said effective communicator. Yeah, that's really not telling me anything. I have great organizational skills. Okay, but you shouldn't be just stopping there. You should be showing me in your experience on one of your bullet points as to what you specifically did to highlight that skill. So anytime I see a person sort of like stop with presenting themselves as like an effective communicator, a great organizer, and then not going beyond that, that's really a red flag for me. But the person who can actually give me tangible examples in their workplace and in their work experience, that's always something that kind of makes me say, yeah, they understand how to write a resume. So that's usually a good sign. Okay, so we are almost out of time. So let me see what else I can get to really, really quick. A lot of questions about keywords, a lot of questions about career gaps. We kind of covered. All right, let's go with this one. What's the one tip you can offer for job searchers going into 2020? Any new technologies, trends, or recruitment ideas you can share with us to look out for? So I feel like career fairs get a bad rep. I'm not sure why. I have had such positive experiences at career fairs and virtual fairs as well. So, I think that for a lot of people, the idea of applying to roles now is simply the hop on LinkedIn, hop on Glassdoor, do the mass, easy apply, hope that you get a bite, and that kind of like really ends there. For 2020, moving into being the more proactive you are on not just LinkedIn and Glassdoor, but like literally out, seeing what career fairs are going on in the city. Chelsea Market always has a bunch of career fairs happening. The industry that you're interested in, literally taking some of those words and typing career fair NYC or career fair Boston or wherever it is that you live, and finding out where they are. Career fairs are like a huge thing, and employers really do depend on them because, quite frankly, they spend money on actually setting it up. It's an investment for them. So don't not turn out to career fairs. We are very, very adamant about hiring people at career fairs. So yeah, I would say that definitely still stick to the virtual, of course, you have to. But yeah, don't be afraid to actually step outside the house, go to a career fair and make connections, network, get some business cards, follow up. Really making those connections and networking is ultimately what's going to best help you land the position that you want to land. All right, so I mean, it looks like we're out of time. I'm very, very sorry for any questions that I couldn't get to. There were so many good ones. I really, really appreciate everybody taking the time. It was, I love nerding out about this stuff as somebody with a people and culture and HR background. So yeah, I really, really appreciate you all coming, and I will see you some other time. Thanks.